On the night of August 8th and into the early morning of August 9th, 1942, the waters around Savo Island in the Solomon Islands were far from as peaceful as they appeared. Beneath the mist and the thick tropical darkness, a steel nightmare was looming closer. This was not merely a battle, it was a massacre at sea, where the United States Navy suffered the bitterest defeat in its history of direct confrontation, turning this strait into a warship graveyard that the world would later know by the haunting name Ironbottom Sound. The game began when Japanese Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, a master of night combat, led a fleet of 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer tearing through the darkness. Their secret weapon was not only their extraordinary skill in visual observation, but also the Long Lance, the Type 93 oxygen torpedo, underwater monsters with tremendous range and devastating explosive power. Far surpassing any Allied weaponry of the time. Meanwhile, the Allied patrol force, exhausted after days of protecting the landings on Guadalcanal, was in a state of lax alertness. They had been split into small groups, like sitting ducks waiting to be hunted. At 1:38 a.m., the tragedy began. Without needing radar, Japanese lookouts spotted the Allied southern group first. In an instant, Long Lance torpedoes were launched, gliding beneath the surface at terrifying speed. The Australian heavy cruiser HMAS Canberra was the first victim. Within minutes, it was struck by 2 torpedoes and dozens of 203mm shell hits, turning into a giant torch in the middle of the sea. USS Chicago soon afterward also had its bow torn open by a torpedo, falling into chaos and disorientation. But that was only the prelude. Mikawa's fleet, moving at more than 26 knots, continued to charge into the northern group, like a red-hot blade cutting through ice. 3 American heavy cruisers, USS Astoria, USS Quincy, and USS Vincennes, were completely taken by surprise. The scene at that moment was horrific beyond imagination. Powerful searchlights from the Japanese ships swept across the sea, locking onto their targets, immediately followed by roaring salvos of gunfire that shattered the silence. USS Quincy tried desperately to fight back, firing its final rounds before being struck by torpedoes on both sides, capsizing and sinking to the ocean floor along with hundreds of sailors. USS Vincennes and USS Astoria fared no better. They were shred by concentrated fire, molten steel mixing with seawater, creating tragic shrieks before being swallowed by the darkness. In less than 40 minutes of combat, the Imperial Japanese Navy had completely paralyzed the Allied protective force while suffering almost no significant losses. The sitting ducks had been shot down without mercy. For military observers, the Battle of Savo Island was a costly lesson in complacency and in the weakness of early generation radar when faced with traditional night combat skill. For history, it stands as proof of the extreme brutality of the Pacific War, where even the smallest tactical mistakes had to be paid for, with thousands of lives and steel fortresses worth millions of dollars. The battle ended as dawn broke, leaving the sea covered with oil slicks, debris, and wreckage. The U.S. Navy learned a blood-soaked lesson at Savo, a lesson written in blood and fire, forcing it to change its entire combat doctrine in order to turn the tide during the dark years that followed in the Second World War.